Today is a nice day in Red Rock Canyon National Conservation Area, and I thought it would be a good day to do an unedited, random review of some of the anatomy of the Joshua tree. This is a Joshua tree. They are known to only grow in or very near the Mojave Desert area, of which this area is the upper northwest area of the Mojave Desert. The most well-known area where Joshua trees grow is in the Joshua Tree National Park, which is in California near the town of 29 Palms. So let's get a little close and see what's going on here. Now, the first thing you'll notice is this rosette of sharp leaves. If you look closely, they all have a very sharp tip, and they also have serrated margins. They do not have the stringy material that you see in the other yucca plants, like the Mojave yucca. Also, they're slightly concave, as you can see here, so that when rainwater collects on the leaves, it'll get siphoned on down into the main part of the plant. Now, when the yucca tree starts up from a seed, the little leaves are very soft and not sharp. And if they survive and don't get eaten by livestock or herbivores, then they transform into these short, sharp leaves. Notice the green color of these leaves. Now, these are sort of old and dried, whereas these are fresher, and you can see they look much better in terms of shape and color. Now, you'll also notice, which I'm sure you have, these things at the tops of the rosette. The leaves formed in the past. The flowers came, and if they were fertilized by the yucca moth, then they produced a fruit. And you can see here where they used to be attached. The fruits used to be attached here and here. And you can see the bottom part of the fruit here. This is probably a calyx that surrounded the flower. So it looks like a skeleton, but that's where those soft, creamy flowers were formed. For the last couple of years, there have been no flowers on the ends of these Joshua trees because the conditions of the right amount of rain, right amount of heat, right amount of cold has not taken place. So we don't have any fresh flowers or fresh fruit to show you. This rosette of leaves forms on the tip of the branches. When the Joshua tree grows, you'll usually have a single stem and the rosette on top like this. And then it'll grow from anywhere to 10 to 40 feet. Now, those tall ones, the 40 feet and less ones, are the ones you'll find in Joshua Tree National Park. Out here, you won't see anything near 40 feet. Most of these are probably in the 10 to 12 foot range. So the tree, after the seed grows, the soft leaves, then it starts with the hard leaves. It'll just stay that way until the right conditions occur, and the stalk will grow out of the top. Every time this inflorescence, which are the groups of flowers, die off, it creates an opportunity for branching, and that is how they branch. Wherever you see a branch, more than likely there was a flower pod there first. As the green leaves get old, they undergo what's called reflex folding. As you can see here, the leaves are all coming out towards us or sticking up. But as they get old, you notice the points are pointing downwards. That is that reflex folding that occurs. Now, some people say that is a protective measure for two reasons. Number one, it protects the stem or branch of the tree from the desert heat and cold. And the other thing, it'll prevent some of the desert rodents from climbing up the branch and going after the Joshua tree seed pods. So this shaggy, bushy thing that you see are basically old leaves that have undergone reflex folding. So then you say, where's the bark? Let's move on to another tree. So again, we have a Joshua tree with the rosette of leaves at the top and the branching and the reflex downward folding of the old leaves, as you can see here, covering most of this branch. But eventually some of them fall off. You can see how it goes from leaf type form down to a more shaggy looking form, down here, and then we see bark. Now these plaques make up the outer hard part of the tree, and they can be anywhere from 1 to 1.5 inches thick and up to 3 inches long. So this is the actual bark. When this breaks away, then you're down to what they call the rind, or the inner covering of the Joshua tree. And this is another area where the bark is missing and you're actually seeing the rind or the skin of the Joshua tree. Now we call this a Joshua tree, but in reality it does not meet the classification of a tree. It is instead a yucca. It belongs to the agave family. Here's a good example, if I don't get stuck here. Here's the bark. There's the rind under here, the inner surface. And these are smaller areas of bark here. And there's my first pinprick. Notice the base of the tree. I would say the diameter there is about 1.5 to 2 feet. Now some people thought that there was a large taproot going downwards into the soil to get water or to stabilize the tree, but in reality the tree tends to branch out with tinier branches called rhizomes, and it's probably a combination of the smaller roots at the base of the tree and the rhizomes that stabilize the tree against the wind. Now, as you can see here, this particular Joshua tree branched early, which would place it in the category of Yucca brevifolia variety Yaugeriana, which is the kind that you see mostly here. The tall Joshua trees, which are the Yucca brevifolia variety brevifolia, or Engelmann, are the ones you can find in abundance in Joshua Tree National Park, but mostly in these areas we are probably looking at the Yaugeriana type Joshua tree. In some areas you can find a mixture of both, but the biggest distinction is the earlier branching and the lower height that you find. Now look at this stand of Joshua trees. Something's going on here. With a cluster like this, these upshoot plants are coming from rhizomes from a main plant, or you could imagine multiple seeds were deposited in this area and actually grew. So what do we have in this cluster? We have the black brush, as you see here. Then we have fairly young Joshua trees. And right next to it, Mojave Yucca. Let's take a look at the leaves of the Mojave Yucca. First of all, they aren't as deep green as the leaves of the Joshua tree. They are more concave, as you can see here, than the Joshua tree leaves, which help to convey water to the main stem. If you notice all that stringy material on the edges of the leaves, these leaves are not serrated, but they have these little stringy things hanging from them. The Paiutes and other Native Americans use those strings for thread. I assume they wove them together first, since this seems to be sort of easy to maneuver. Notice also the length of these leaves. Still, even though it's not a Joshua tree, it's still in the yucca category and still in the agave family. So essentially its growth and development is the same. As you can see, the skeletal remains of the inflorescence is here on top. Then the tuft of leaves. Then the reflex downward folding of the leaves covering most of the bark, and then maybe a little bit of bark showing down below. And branching off the main stem. So this is characteristic of some form of the Mojave Yucca. There are several varieties of that as well. So if you're out with somebody and they ask you what these trees are, my rule of thumb is if they're short leaves, dark green, it's a Joshua tree. If they're the long leaves and don't have the same type of branching, then it's a Mojave Yucca of some variety. So some of these trees, when they're young, like this one's slightly different. If they don't grow a stem, sometimes people will call them the banana yucca. And that's because the fruit that's produced by them looks like a small banana. And the ones I've seen look more like a plantain. Some young Joshua trees here, already branching. This is a good example of how that works. Now this was probably the main inflorescence where the flowers were here. The flowers are gone, the fruit's gone. And what happens after they die? That's when branching occurs, and you see two branches on either side of that main inflorescence. So I had said that the Joshua tree is not really a tree. I'm not sure that I explained that. It's because inside the stem there are no tree rings, which apparently make the distinction between a plant that's a tree and not a tree. It's supposed to be made of a spongy material, which I've never seen, because you're not supposed to cut into any Joshua trees, but apparently inside this stem here, it's a sponge. Oh, it is sort of soft, even this old piece, but there's a spongy, moist material inside, which is then covered by the rind, which is then covered by the bark, and if old leaves are present, it's covered by the reflex down folding of those leaves. So we call them trees because they look like trees, but in reality they are plants, like this fellow here. You can see that the branching started when it was about 3.5 feet tall. This looks like matchweed here, the sort of yellowish bush next to blackbrush, Joshua tree. So this is a virtual playground for botanists. Roadrunner. Didn't expect to see that guy. He has run his road and he is gone. Here's a stand of desert trumpet. They are known for the green twig-like structure and that bulbous portion near the top where the other branches form. The bulb area is supposed to have something to do with the oxygenation or exchange of carbon dioxide with the atmosphere. I know this is about Joshua trees, but there's so much around here. Creosote bush. All the little yellow flowers then turn into the little fuzzy things, which probably have the seeds. There was a fire out here several years ago, and that is why you have these plants looking like this. These are Joshua trees also. But notice how in the heat of the fire, the branches, oh, there's a little lizard with the green tail. The branches just folded over like this and died. And you can see the charred remains right here as well. But look what's happened. New growth at the base of these charred Joshua trees. Now this particular tree makes me think of a desert willow. But I usually like to see some of the leaves sort of folding downwards to verify that, or the bell-shaped flowers that they have. This is another huge creosote bush with the flowers. Yeah, they are the seeds. You can see them right there. One thing you'll also find on creosote bushes are these little knolls. And it's usually a fungus type thing that forms on the branches. And I tend to call this type the tiger creosote bush because it has the rings around the stems. And that is not a real name. That is my unofficial name for this particular tree. And again, one of the trees that were affected by fire. And it has new growth at the base, so we can assume the base escaped some of the heat of the fire and was able to propagate. This is a good example of what this inside. Of course, it won't be spongy now because the trees, this portion's dead, but it'll give you an idea of what it looks like on the inside. Here's the proof I needed. This is another one of those trees, and it is indeed a desert willow. There are the bell-shaped flowers, and the droopy portion that you often see hanging, a little brown thing. So that makes this a desert willow tree. This is a globe mallow, in which all the flowers are gone and it's gone into its summer retreat from the heat. This is a stand of 4 young Joshua trees. You can't even see the stems on these trees yet. However, notice one thing. At least 2 of them had flowers, as evidenced by the whitish stalks. So the next thing they'll do is to start to branch when the time is right.